Hello, everyone. Greetings. My name is Sean O'Donnell, and I'm the Associate Director of Academic Ventures and Engagement at the Harvard Radcliffe Institute. On behalf of the Harvard Radcliffe Institute, I want to welcome you to the Roosevelt Poetry Reading, Transients, a poetry reading and discussion with Douglas Ridloff. Before I introduce Douglas Ridloff, I want to acknowledge the two ASL interpreters with us today. Flip Wilson, who will be interpreting for Douglas, and Monique Sarpy, who will be interpreting for me. Thank you so much for your expert assistance today. I also want to note that typically Zoom closed captioning does not distinguish between capital D deaf and lowercase d deaf. Today, we do have personalized closed captioning, but in order to be clear about which meaning I'm referring to, I will explicitly distinguish between the two as I speak. Douglas Ridloff is not only an extraordinary poet who has performed in many prestigious venues throughout the US. He is also a fierce advocate for American Sign Language. He is the founder and executive director of ASL Slam, a nonprofit organization that creates safe spaces for the capital D deaf community to thrive in the many modalities of their native language. By hosting a monthly event at the Nuyorican Poets Cafe in New York City, and then bringing ASL Slam and his unique style of visual vernacular poetry to Australia, Cuba, France, Germany, Israel, Jamaica, Russia, the United Kingdom, and beyond, Douglas Ridloff has fostered engagement and enthusiasm for sign languages worldwide. You can read more about Douglas Ridloff's accomplishments on our website. Today's program intentionally challenges the traditional notions and assumptions of a poetry reading, where typically a poet at a lectern would open a carefully bookmarked text to read aloud several poems in a staid but personal manner, all to suggest that the text is the paramount register of feeling and meaning. That will not be today's reading. In Ridloff's hands, poetry is embodied. It is fluid and dynamic, forming its own distinctive identity and vernacular. It raises questions about the long-held notions that poetry be written, oral, and aural, that its aesthetic value be rooted in literary traditions. It suggests instead that feeling and meaning can be more inclusive, that the traditional understanding of poetry can and should expand beyond the audism and ableist tropes of sound and sense. It offers another vision of who a poet can be and how poetry can be made and experienced. Indeed, Ridloff's poetry is for everyone, but it particularly calls upon hearing audiences to listen differently, to explore new ways of knowing, imagining, and being in the world. At the same time, Ridloff's work underscores the richness of ASL, the complexity of capital D deaf culture, and of all communication. ASL poetry is finding its place across the world because of Ridloff's work. Through his work, we can see that languages, like people, need to be nurtured. They need a home. Languages otherwise can find themselves passing quickly out of existence, if not cared for and forever cast as transients. Before I turn the program over to Douglas, I just want to provide you with a brief overview of the format for today's program. Douglas will discuss and perform his poetry, and afterwards, we will take audience questions. We encourage you to use the Q&A feature on Zoom to submit your questions at any time during the program. Since we anticipate a lot of questions, we ask that you keep them short so that we can answer as many as possible. It is now my pleasure to pass the virtual floor to Douglas Ridloff.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Sean, for bringing me to the virtual floor. Hello again. And this is my sign name, Douglas Ridloff, that movement there along the jawline. I'm going to sign a poem for you right now. Before I jump into that, though, I would like to teach you a few simple signs. The first is raindrop. So this is a sign for rain, and this is a sign for raindrop, isolating single raindrops like so, and we can show them dropping more forcefully and heavily to the ground. And then tree, that's the sign for tree, and then we can show the movement of the tree in the wind. Waterfall, we can sign simply, or we can show the violence of that waterfall and what happens to the current of the river as it flows beyond that. And butterfly, this is the sign for butterfly, and then we can show the way that the butterfly flaps and flies through the air. This poem is performed in a visual vernacular. It will not be translated or spoken. There will be no captions for it, no voicing during it. The objective here is for you to watch it and to simply absorb and experience it. Take your ears off and turn on your eyes. This poem is titled Transients. It's about being in transition, about searching for a home in that homeless space of seeking. It's about the experience of life. You notice in the beginning, it's rough, that the rain is violent and the waterfall turns violently. That's because in the early stage of my life, I was language deprived and lacked identity. And the things that I went through, those life experiences, you can see they evolved and changed over time to find peace. Because I was able to find language. You see the leaf falling from the tree and settling into the river. You see the butterfly is the moment where I uncover my identity and it turns into my hands, my language. Just through my language, I uncovered my identity, right? So that was my home. And then when I took this home, when I began to reach out to poetic journals, I still found that I was transient. I couldn't find a place to fit in. I was told repeatedly that poetry needed to be in text. I would say this is poetry. It is of the same value as what you have. There's nothing wrong with this here. So I've held on to it since. So this journey that I went through, that I experienced, represents a journey of deaf individuals across our deaf community and deaf culture, because it's similar among many individuals. This search for finding language. ASL started in America just in 1817, and it became this thriving thing that was this way for this language in which people could communicate. And it was brought to academia and not accepted. Its body of literature was offered to the literature world and turned down. And then in 1880, there was a conference in Milan concerning deaf education at that time and the state of it. One of the main speakers there was Alexander Graham Bell, who motivated everyone to ban sign language. They took a vote, and all of these educators from various countries in the Western world voted to ban sign language in the use of education. So many of our deaf schools were using sign language, and American Sign Language in the United States then stopped using American Sign Language. It was removed from the school. Deaf teachers were removed from their positions, and hearing teachers who knew no sign language were brought in to replace those deaf teachers. And the children who would sign were punished for it. Corporal punishment. And they were isolated from each other so that their language would not mingle and thrive. And American Sign Language very much was at that time losing its home. But it remained strong. It stubbornly survived through all of that because the children would find ways to get together, to seek each other out, and to keep the language alive. And as they grew to be adults, they founded deaf clubs in which they could pass their stories and poems down through the generations. So before I go on to the next poem, I'm about to go on to the next poem, but I would like to give you a little bit of vocabulary for your eyes before we get started. The first is bee. That's the sign for bee, but we can show a bee flying through the air thusly. And flower, that's a sign for flower. But then flowers have so many different types of shapes. We don't just sign flower, we can show them being small, large, having long stems or short stems of different sizes and shapes by illustrating them with different hand shapes. The title of this poem is Symbiosis, and it will not have voice interpretation. So once again, I ask you to tune your eyes in and to just absorb the poem as I perform it. So you see, we have the flower on one hand and the bee on the other. And they live in this symbiotic relationship, a symbiosis. And it's so beautiful, the way they interrelate. There's plenty of life. They fulfill each other. If the bee were to go, you know what would happen to the flower? It would go as well. And the same thing for the bee. If there were no flower, the bees would perish as well. The same thing goes metaphorically for American Sign Language, ASL, and the deaf community. They share a symbiotic relationship. Without deaf people, ASL would not exist. Without ASL, the deaf community loses its identity, gives in to oppression, and similarly perishes. After what happened in Milan in 1880, ASL was on the decline. Deaf people were facing the highest levels of oppression that they'd faced in ages. We're losing their language. Our cultural heritage and our literature was facing a terrible crisis. So then in 1913, a man named George Veditz, that's his sign name, the two fingers tapping there near the jaw, he was the president of the National Association of the Deaf, or NAD. And he decided they had to stop this. They had to do something to preserve this language that felt like it was disappearing. It had to be cherished and preserved. So he invested $5,000 for a camera, which, if you think about it, in terms of money at that time, back in 1913, it's not like today's money. You could get a camera for $5 maybe. We have them everywhere. Back then, $5,000 he managed to raise to film American Sign Language for the first time. And he gave a speech on film, which is a historic landmark speech for us in our deaf culture and deaf community. It made a lasting impact that he preserved for us. It's a speech called The Preservation of Sign Language. The goal of that speech is to keep ASL alive. And I would like to show you just a clip of his speech, just the very end of it. So we can show that clip now. And it's truly powerful. And I think it's crucial, important that we quote Veditz so that we do not forget him. Because he's this incredible model. He's like our Shakespeare, who, regardless how many years we're on Earth, his quotes should remain on Earth. Just as people still perform Shakespeare, I believe that our community should continue to quote George Veditz. So we're talking about a long time now, from 1817, birth of American Sign Language, to the recognition of sign language, which occurred in 1965, when William Stokey also took a moment to say, hey, hold on here. This is a language. This is American Sign Language. And he researched it and looked at the linguistics of it and published proof of its existence. And then from 1965 to 1970 and into the 70s, people began to start to accept it. And some deaf schools began to switch their philosophies back to teaching with sign language, but some did not. For example, my own school, I attended a deaf school, but I was raised in what's referred to as the oral philosophy. Even after this being published in 1965, the school that I attended had not changed their philosophy. So I did not have direct sign language communication with my teacher. until much later in high school. So it took decades for those changes to occur. And the growth of ASL was slow, but it has gotten stronger and stronger. And some colleges we've seen have started to accept American Sign Language as a foreign language, which finally is great, a little step, let's say, but come on, folks, a foreign language? We know what ASL stands for, right? American Sign Language, right? And this country we're in is referred to as America, right? So let's marry the two. We've got American Sign Language in the country of America, where they're both American. American Sign Language didn't come here from Pluto. Come on, folks. It's not a foreign language. Let's move on to the next step beyond that. This next poem that I will be performing, which is called Singularity. that's my barbaric yop. You see the sign for support in there. Refers to the way in which we need support for our deaf children. Let us cease depriving them of their language. Let us be done with that. So people sometimes wonder why I included music into that poem. I want people to understand that deaf people can see music. The human body has its own rhythm. The heart beats. Every human has a rhythm built into their bodies and their heartbeat. Deaf people do too. That beat, that lub dub is a rhythm we have in us. And I want to explore the idea that music can only occur through sound. I think that's close-minded. If you look at the ocean waves, the movement of the ocean waves have their own rhythm and music to them too, as they roll in and out, cascading off the shore. It's a visual sound. It's its own music. If you re-envision the idea of music as coming through your eyes instead of your ears, you can see it as I do. And I wanted to use this music also as a way to build a bridge for people to come over to see what we're up to. And to help hearing people understand the visuals of the poem. So by nestling the music on the American Sign Language, I believe that I've done that. And building a bridge to a hearing audience is part of what I do. As a founder of ASL Slam, as a nonprofit organization, we work to be more than just ASL Slam. Our objective is to provide a home for the signing community to play with their language. Through poetry, storytelling, through music, dance, comedy, whatever it may be. So that people can see the sophistication of American Sign Language as a language with multiple modalities, not merely as a communication tool. That's why ASL Slam is so important, and that's why Veditz is so important too. That goal of preserving the language, we're the next step in that. We want to preserve the language, but we want to evolve it. We want to show the world its value as well. So Veditz truly impacted me. And now I would like to share a poem based on that clip you saw of him earlier. This poem is titled The Nobelist Gift. It will have some vocal description. We see rows of students at desks. The last row and the last desk, a deaf student picks up his paper and attempts to pronounce the words on it. In frustration, he balls the paper up and slams it to the floor. On the window next to him, where the curtains sway, a gust of wind blows through and sucks the paper out into the air, where it unravels and floats on the wind, catches on a signpost for a minute, then lands on a window. Through the picture window, we see a girl in braids and a skirt, another deaf student picking up chalk and spelling O-R-A-L-I-S-M. She then attempts to pronounce it, oralism. Rain pitter-pats against the window, wiping down the piece of paper, which then floats and flutters on the wind, catches on a fence or a ridge and lands on the ocean. A fishing boat hauls up an immense net, catching our essay and crabs. No matter what any crab attempts to do, none of them can escape as they constantly pull each other down. The paper is caught up in a breeze and taken away again, where it floats until it lands on the road and is picked up in the wheel well of a school bus. On the school bus, we see the children bouncing back and forth on the bumpy road, and we see their mouths flapping as they chitter and chatter, and one deaf student sits at the back of the bus, excluded from those conversations. A piece of paper slaps against the window. The student takes it by opening the window and looks at it and feels a moment of connection right before it is torn back out by the wind. Paper journeys back through a window with curtains into a room with 3 rows of desks, and in the last row in the last chair sits a student. And there on his desk lands this piece of paper. The student picks it up and looks at it, smiles, and raises their hand to volunteer to present. And they present in sign language this time. I hope that you all will protect and preserve our beautiful language of signs, which is the noblest gift that the universe has bestowed upon us. Thank you. So that speech had quite an impact on me and on deaf children for years to come. I want those deaf children to have that language, to be able to play with poetry and stories, and to be able to create their own literature so that we can preserve and continue the language through the future generations. And in that preservation, include art as a primary modality, as a valued modality. And not just in our community, but we also want the larger hearing world to look in and see sign language as something that has its own art forms as well. We're talking about the decades that we've gone through. We keep hitting these barriers as ASL Slam even now. And we're breaking through them. Finally, museums have started inviting us to perform at them. There are various organizations where we've been able to show our work in more mainstream stages and to differing audiences. But still, as I offer our work to literary journals and publications, we're told that it must be written text, repeatedly denied, because it must be the written word. That has come back to us to haunt us time and time again. So I finally decided that I was going to have to start some new projects. And one of those projects I'm going to share with you today, which is another bridge, which I've been building out to that world so that I could meet them on their turf and match their rules in English while still preserving my own language. So Flip, the interpreter whose voice you've been hearing, has worked with me on translating some of these poems in this project that we are working on, where the ASL comes first. But through the guise of English, perhaps we can bring in these literary foundations and the wider poetry community until we don't need a bridge anymore. Until we have a space where we understand that American Sign Language has a right to a place in the literature of the world and in the poetry of the world. So we have 3 poems that I'll perform now, and Flip will speak the English translations of these poems. The first one, the body of work is referred to as the Heart series, and we selected just one poem from this. The first of these three that we'll perform is called First Glance Romance. First glance, love dub, a chance, love dub, romance, love dub, let's dance, love dub, forever. The next poem that I will perform is called Heart of Glass. At last, I may open up to share this heart with you. Slam! I sweep up these shattered shards and ball them like burger meat and put this raw heart back where it goes. And the third one we have for you is called Fistful of Love. You ever do this? Pull a glob of hatred from your heart and crush it to smithereens, only to watch it blossom into something beautiful? And tuck it gently back inside the folds of your coat. So those are three that we have with translation that I wanted to share with you today. And now I would like you to just watch a poem in sign language. It's called Heart Tide, and it's just a video, so you'll read the text. Okay, before I turn the virtual floor over to Sean, I want to ask you guys, please do not attempt translation at home. All right, Sean, my pleasure to offer you the virtual floor.
Hi, Douglas. Thank you so much. That was wonderful, informative, and just powerful and very thought-provoking. We're already getting a number of different questions and comments coming in from the audience. As a reminder, please use the Q&A feature to submit your questions. One of the questions actually came in from Harvard College's Deaf Awareness Club. And they're students at the university, and they're interested in a question that a number of people have asked so far, which is, how do you select the kind of stories you want to tell with your poetry? Where do you get your inspiration from?
Good question. In the beginning, in my early work, I was always drawn by the ideas of nature and the theme of nature. I found it very powerful, and it just reminded me of peace, but yet there's this whole world in it. There's a whole world in a flower, in a tree, in water. There's so much embodied in it and so much symbolism. It's so rife with symbolism. So I was thinking about the experience that I was going through, and that was a lot of my early work. So I would use nature as this, also as this neutral canvas on which to present that, as a way that I could express myself, as a metaphor that I could utilize to share my journey and my experiences. I would think about things like, what does it feel like a tree? What does a tree feel like when you go to chop it down? What does a flower feel like when you pluck it? How does the bee feel when it's crushed, when it's stepped on? So by taking some of those experiences, I was able to refer to my own experience through metaphor. And that was some of my early works experience. I hope that answers the question somewhat.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much. We're also getting some questions that I want to kind of morph into one here, which is about your audiences. You have different audiences. You have hearing audiences. You have deaf audiences, some who are ASL, more skilled than others. How do you transverse those audiences? How do you work with those audiences? And the other question we've been getting a lot too is, during COVID, has it been more challenging to work with any of these audiences and with the deaf community through Zoom and the situation we find ourselves in?
Yeah, really, it's been a huge barrier for me. First of all, because ASL Slam was a monthly live event on a stage. You had to be there to feel the vibe and to be there in the presence, to get the feel of it, to get the interaction between people and the energy of the crowd. We would feed each other. I'd take energy from the crowd and get energy back from the crowd. And then I also used to tour the world. We'd have a lineup of different journeys planned and trips and tours to go on, where I'd perform and teach workshops, and we'd get energy from those audiences. So after coronavirus hit, with Zoom, it just was a completely different kind of energy, a different feel. It's two-dimensional, first of all, whereas on the stage, we're talking about 3 dimensions, of course. So my performance on stage was, I think it just wasn't as powerful on Zoom as it was on stage. Then as we, there was certainly a learning curve with it. We played with some of like cameras and technology and trying to figure out how to engage an audience through it. It was definitely a new thing and a new challenge. I'm not a 90-year-old yet, giving up on technology. I've still got something in me. So I knew I had to find a way to get it together. I knew I had the passion to keep it going. So started to figure it out over time.
That's wonderful. I'm glad that you've been able to find a way forward in all of this. One of the questions that we're getting is that people are inspired. They're getting a lot
all the way there yet, but yeah.
Well, yeah. People are very inspired by the beauty of your poetry. And I think one of the questions people are asking, I've seen in different forms, is whether you would consider it cultural appropriation for a hearing person to perform ASL poetry.
My belief is, well, let's say, for example, actually, that Native, just like Native American tribes have their own language and customs, so too does, like if a white man came into a tribe and wanted to say that the language is cool and just go out and start performing in Navajo or another Native American language, you have to think about how that feels. So it's a similar idea. So after all this time, since 1817 to today, consider the level of oppression that we've been through. It's worth, there's this whole idea that sign language is so cool, everyone can participate in it and get on stage. And I don't think it's not entirely appropriate for a hearing person to sign a poem.
Definitely. So I guess this leads to another question, which we have here, which is about allies of the deaf community. Aside from shining, what can allies do better? Aside from shining a spotlight on deaf performers and professionals and ensuring communication access and addressing accessibility in general, what specific advice do you have for allies?
That's a good question too. Come and support. Collaborate or reach out to other hearing people and draw attention to what we're doing. And show that this language has what's going on, that there are these artistic modalities that the language has and this work that is being created in the language. Reach out to companies, to organizations, to everything from corporates to nonprofits, to bring them in. so that they have access. We can get them, we are thinking about access in terms of getting captions in movies, so we can advocate for access to our work as well. We're, as deaf people, trying to fit into a hearing world, which hearing people have designed. And there's all of these ways in which you can reach out there and tell other hearing people to get on with the program and make sure that we have that access, but also to let our language lead. That everything here is equal to what the hearing community has, and that everything in ASL is equal to what the hearing community has in their spoken language and what they've created.
So that's interesting. I really want to talk to you a little bit about the medium of ASL poetry, the ephemerality of the poetry itself. That's part of its aesthetic appeal, and I think many people are responding to that, to its beauty. Yet, how can we, or should we, preserve this art form to make it available for posterity, for things like criticism, academic discourse? How can we preserve it as part of history? Are random YouTube videos and channels enough? I'm wondering if there shouldn't be a dedicated archive to sustain and memorialize a medium which otherwise would be lost.
Yeah, good question. I could go on for hours on that topic. So I'll try to condense my answer. So you mentioned YouTube and having channels on YouTube. The first problem there is that it's all over the place. So if you type in ASL poetry in the search field in YouTube, like you said, like about cultural appropriation you'd mentioned, what you'll find is that you'll find a whole pile of hearing people that do this thing. And so it's not a curation of poems of the deaf community. So to find professional level poetry is extremely difficult. You'll find ABC stories, which is another genre where they use the hand shapes of the alphabet. There's thousands of videos of that, of ASL students in college who are, by their colleges required to come up with these ABC stories and these short stories in American Sign Language, which, is fine, but it's not professional, right? And of course, they're free to upload it to YouTube, but it's this open platform. So there are just thousands of them there. So that isn't the appropriate place, I think, for high caliber poetry to be published, if you want to be able to find it easily. And there's just a handful of poems of deaf signers who have really signed and published their poetry that has been uploaded to YouTube. And I can identify the difference by seeing them, just the quality of the student versus the master, so to speak. So YouTube, I think, is not the right place. So that's why I've been fighting for, even though that's why I've been hosting these workshops with the Human Center for the Humanities, to create a space to elevate ASL poetry and to have this recognition as a published medium, and for it to be preserved and archived so that we can direct people to it at the quality that it deserves that accreditation. George Veditz's film, he was the first to do that. And his film has been preserved in the library in Washington, D.C., in the National Library. So we need to do more of that preservation. We need to have more of a movement of that with our language, because right now there really is nothing out there. There's maybe one place at Gallaudet University, but it's very small in terms of what is actually published there and available in their archives. And that's just that singular university. It's not in the broader spectrum of poetry as an art form. So that's part of we're in this transient space right now.
So I also wanted to explore with you, and some of the questions are really interested in the work you've been doing internationally and how this is received in other countries and other places. What do you have to negotiate culturally in terms of bringing the poetry in this format? How is it accepted? What is what do you think the impact is?
Yeah, I remember the first time I was invited. I was invited to France for a festival they had there, and I thought it was so cool. And I got to fly there and perform in front of this international audience my poetry. And afterwards, someone came up to me and said, this is an international signing audience, and some of your poems were in American Sign Language, so they're not going to, they didn't understand you. And I was like, what? I thought it was, so they had all these suggestions for me to alter my work and to shift my work so that it would work for that audience. And that was the first time I was really hit by that. And I really had to analyze myself and what my approach was. See, in Europe, that's much more international. They use a universal signs system so that no specific language of each country takes over. So if you know French Sign Language and German Sign Language and the two of you get together, you can just use a sort of medium international system in order to communicate. And that system is overall more visual and less vocabulary sort of. So when I got back home, I started thinking about that and moving into the visual vernacular. And honestly, I found that I liked it more. I was drawn into it as a poetic medium immediately. I did appreciate the reach that my American Sign Language poetry had, but I got invited to more and more international events as I moved my performance spectrum toward the visual vernacular.
That's fascinating. I have one last question for you before we close. We have so many more. Thank you, everyone, for all the great questions today. But one question I think that I'd like to get your input on, Douglas, which is, we are seeing more and more representation, across the board of different lives, different life experiences, different cultures, different people, in films and in social and news outlets. And in many ways, diverse experiences and positionalities are being amplified. What would you like to see regarding capital D deaf representation? And in what areas do you believe deaf representation might have the greatest impact?
So which areas you were saying? Could you clarify?
Whether it's in business, whether it's in film, whether it's having it taught in elementary schools, or having teachers in elementary schools who are deaf.
Yeah. Oh, this is a conversation that quickly gets sticky, so to speak. So, because not all individuals may identify as big D deaf. Some people may also identify themselves as big D deaf, and then within the community be told that they are little d deaf from the perspective of someone else who sees themselves as big D deaf, we could say. So that perspective from inside the community gets sticky quickly. If you identify, from my perspective, you identify as big D deaf, that's fine. That is great. But I think the main point is we all must be supporting the deaf community. It makes a difference how you're supporting and promoting that deaf community and showing everyone outside the community that positive impact that we can have. And we have value and quality, that we can reframe the hearing world's perspective on us and their thinking. I mean, the more big D thinking we get out there, the better we can connect, the bigger we can become, and the greater the support can be for us, and the more we can just push the walls down in all of those areas.
That's wonderful. Thank you again for your sharing your poetry, your work, your vision, and all your efforts to make that happen. I'm sorry to say this concludes our program for today. I want to say thank you to Douglas and recognize our ASL interpreters again, Flip Wilson, Monique Sarpy, for their expert assistance. I also want to thank you, our audience, for your terrific questions. I would also like to encourage you to attend an upcoming poetry event, Native Americans and the National Consciousness, virtual reading and conversation with Joy Harjo on April 5th at 6 p.m. The Harvard Radcliffe Institute is proud to be a co-sponsor of this event with the Harvard University Native American Program. The link for the Joy Harjo reading has also been posted in the Zoom chat. Today's program has been recorded and will be posted on the Radcliffe website in about a week. For information about upcoming Radcliffe virtual programs and to see videos of past events, please visit our website, radcliffe.harvard.edu. Thank you again for joining us today, and take care.